So today we have a very special guest with an amazing career, from the iconic comedy duo of Tim and Tom to The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson and even touring with Sinatra. Not to mention his book just came out last year, Still Standing, My Journey from Streets and Saloons to Stage and Sinatra. Please welcome the man who made Sinatra laugh, Tom Dreesen, to the Untied podcast.
Woo! Hey, Thank you, guys. You interrupted my reading. I was reading this very funny book.
That's a handsome guy on that cover, I got to say.
By the way, that's my prom picture. That's really not me.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, I was like, you look just like you look on the cover. You know, I every time I see it, I've watched, recordings of you from Johnny Carson to Letterman to all of those, and you look like you haven't aged a day. So...
Boy, I tell you what, if I'd have known you were going to talk like that, I'd have done this show a lot earlier. Thank you.
But yeah, so we were just, talking before the show, and I was like, reading the book and everything. I was like, I'm one of the people that can pick up a book and easily set it down, but not this book. I was turning a page after page after page, like on the edge of my seat. And I was like, I finally get it. I finally get why people read. And it was the biggest thing that popped out at me was like, he has had a funny bone his entire life. He's had like a sense of humor. And I know that's a big thing for you, developing a sense of humor. And, but where do you think like that, if you could pinpoint where your funny bone came from, where your sense of humor came from?
Well, a sense of humor, by my humble definition, is not when you have the ability to laugh at others' shortcomings and misfortunes. It's when you have the ability to laugh at your own. When you can laugh at yourself, that I think psychiatrists would probably tell you the number one problem they have with their patients is we take ourselves too serious. We just do. And by the way, stand-up comedians are the worst at that, but we take ourselves too serious. And I learned at a very early age that if you could laugh at yourself or your shortcomings, people were attracted to you. People like to be around somebody who pokes fun at himself or herself, But where I wanted to be funny, when I was a little boy, and you read the book, so Jordan, that shining shoes in the bars when I was growing up, or is it Jackson? I keep forgetting the Polish.
It's Jackson, and I think we said Jonathan.
Tom, it's whatever you want.
Anything that starts with a J, right? Okay. Perfect. Anyhow, Julia, I was saying. But you read the book. So when I was a little boy, shining shoes in all the bars, I had 8 brothers and sisters. We'll start from the beginning here. We were raggedy poor. We lived in a shack, a rat-infested, roach-infested shack. If a window broke, you stuck a rag in it. You had holes in your shoes, you put cardboard in there. I was a raggedy poor kid. So I at a very early age, there was a mantra in the neighborhood I grew up in that you only deserve in life what you work for. And I went with my older brother, and we started shining shoes in all the bars to bring money home to help feed my brothers and sisters. And there was 36 taverns in Harvey, Illinois, where I grew up on the south side of Chicago, a suburb. And there were 8 in my neighborhood. So I shined shoes in all the 8 taverns. And I would go to my uncle's tavern last, because that's where my mom was a bartender. And I would wait there for the shifts to change in the factory. And then I'd go back to all the bars again. But while I was there sitting at a table in the back, my uncle, a man named Frank Sinatra, he was my mother's brother-in-law, my mother's sister's husband. He would tell jokes behind the bar. And I was fascinated that even as a little boy, that with his vocabulary, his vernacular, his inflection on certain words, he could cause this sound to come out of everybody's body that filled the room like electricity and just united everybody. They would all become one in their laughter. I just found that fascinating. And I used to emulate him. I would tell some of his jokes, many that should not be told on a Catholic school playground, But I thought it was great getting laughter, So I always was good at telling jokes or telling a good story. I never thought ever in my wildest dreams that I'd ever be in show business. It was the furthest thing from my mind. But in answer to your question, I developed that wanting to be funny and wanting to make people laugh as a little boy watching him. And oftentimes the joke was on him. He was Italian, and he would laugh when you made fun of some Italian thing or something. But in those days, you could, they did. The Polish guys did jokes about Polish people. The Irish guys, the Irish were the best.
That's
the
what I'm
Irish.
talking about.
Yeah. Well, no, and they have the. Again, a sense of humor is when you have the ability to laugh at yourself or your own shortcomings. Today, with all the politically correct police, who we'll talk about that later, how angry I am at them, but that well, if you're Jewish, you can only tell Jewish jokes. If you're Black, you can only tell jokes about Black people. If you're Italian, you only tell jokes about Italian people. I grew up in a neighborhood where the Irish, especially the Irish, if they didn't care who was on the stage, an orangutan could be on the stage telling Irish jokes, and they'd be laughing. You're right, lad. We like to drink a bit, It was that everybody laughed at all these ethnicities and the impression that we gave to the other ethnicities. As long as it wasn't cruel, but again, that's where I got my sense of humor and where I wanted to be funny, and where I enjoyed making people laugh.
So Tom, one of my questions is, one of the best things I think that my dad did for me was in 7th grade, we drove to the grocery store, and little did I know, behind my back, he talked to the manager and wanted me to be put to work. So obviously you worked at an insane young age. Do you think getting, like, with your situation being really poor and having to work, do you think that work ethic carried over to your career and is still something that, because of what you had to go through at a younger age because you obviously put work, hard work, real insane work to get to where you are today. So do you think from your childhood it carried over to you in the prime of your career and even still to today?
Absolutely. Without a doubt. My work ethic came from those days, without a doubt, that all the hardships I went through, if I close my eyes, no matter where I have been in my career, if I was performing at the White House, I performed for 5 or 6 different presidents. I performed, as you know, for years with Frank Sinatra and 20,000 seat arenas, 40,000 seat arenas in Hawaii. I performed in these magnificent, on Ellis Island, where my ancestors came from, my Irish and Italian, where no matter where I was, if I close my eyes, I see a little boy with his shoe shine box trudging through the snow and the bitter cold, going from tavern to tavern, trying to make enough money to feed his brothers and sisters. That's who I am. I'm that little boy, and I'll always be a little boy with that work ethic, that you only deserve in life what you work for. And no matter how many times I was knocked down, I kept getting back up again. And if you read the book, it's why it's called Still Standing. It's a double entendre. I've been a stand-up comedian for 51 years, but I've been knocked down a lot, physically knocked down in my life. But I kept getting back up again. And it came from that work ethic, from that childhood. And also, I have to tell you, I don't regret one bit of that. When I give motivation talks, I give motivation speeches at corporate America and at universities and also to comedians. I do on 4 subjects. I talk about perception, visualization, self-talk, and develop a sense of humor. But one of the things when I open the talk and I say I had 8 brothers and sisters, we lived in a shack. Both my parents were alcoholic at one time. I shined shoes in taverns. I set pins in bowling alleys. I caddied in the summertime, carrying 2 bags a day. I sold newspapers on the corner. I had a paper up. I tell them that. And I don't regret one moment of that. I say to this day, that's the greatest thing that ever happened to me, because that's my perception. All of life is how you perceive it. A quick example, I say to the class, a little boy's in the backyard. He's got a bat and a ball. And he said, I'm the greatest hitter in the world. He throws the ball up in the air and he swings and he misses. He said, I am the greatest hitter in the world. He throws the ball up in the air the second time. He swings and he misses. He said, I am the greatest hitter in the world. He throws it up the third time and he swings and he misses. He said, I'm the greatest pitcher in the world.
there you go. I love that.
Nothing changed but his perception. And I perceive all those hardships to be the greatest thing that ever happened to me. Because, buddy, when after the comedy team broke up, we were, as you pointed out, we were America's first black and white comedy team, and there were no comedy clubs in those days. It was during 1969 to 1975, we toured the North and the South, all black clubs in the North and the South, what they affectionately called the Chitlin Circuit, all white nightclubs. Where I would be the only. Tim would be the only black guy within 5 miles, and we work in all black area. I'd be the only white guy. The hardships, the dues we paid in those days. And then the team split up and broke my heart. I didn't want that to happen. I thought the team was my whole life at that time. And when the team split up and I went out on my own, I had a wife and 3 kids. I'm hitchhiking up and down Sunset Boulevard. My wife and family were in Chicago. I ended up sleeping in an old Nash Rambler, a broken down car that was up on blocks. The front seat came down. I stayed in that car 30 days, hitchhiking up and down Sunset Boulevard, begging to work for free every night at the Comedy Store. But I wouldn't give up. And I believed in my dream. I believed that this is what I was supposed to be, a stand-up comedian. And again, that hardship of my childhood, that work ethic of my childhood, don't give up, keep getting back up again, so that was a long answer to a very short question.
No, it's all good. It was a great answer. I want to piggyback on the Comedy Store because I was reading, and it said like you begged to be on stage. What was that process really like? Like, because you said you were sleeping in your car. Like, were you just going up to the manager or whatever? Like, please let me get on. Please let me get on. Because I'm guessing there's obviously got to be more details into like that story and you getting on stage.
Let me tell you, go back to 1975 in America. Now, you guys can't go back to that, but
great year.
In 1975 in America, wherever you went in America, people say, "What do you do for a living?" You say, "I'm a stand-up comedian." The next question out of their mouth was, "Oh yeah, you ever been on Johnny Carson?" If you hadn't been on Johnny Carson, in the eyes of America, you just weren't a comedian. It was the show to do. One appearance on that show, Freddie Prinze got a sitcom the next day. One appearance, his whole life changed. Johnny Carson left New York in 1972 and brought The Tonight Show out to Burbank, California. So the Comedy Store was the only game in town in those days. There was no improvisation, no Laugh Factory, none of the other clubs, just the Comedy Store. And people were getting discovered every single night at the Comedy Store. The energy was unbelievable. I mean, the talent coordinators were coming, from all over because comedy became the rock and roll of the 70s, So to get onto the Comedy Store was very, very important. If Mitzi Shore didn't like you, it was back to Toledo, pal. It was back to Harvey on the line. I mean, because there was no other game in town. So you had to get on there to get to the audition for the Comedy Store was almost as tense as the first appearance on The Tonight Show, So I would go there every night. You could sign up, you'd wait. I'd go there and mostly Monday nights in those days, but I would go there every night and just trying to get on. After about a month, I finally got on one night and I had to do like 5 to 7 minutes in front of Mitzi. And fortunately, I got over. And when I came off, she said, "Well, I can see you have some stage presence and you've been around. We'll find a spot for you." And then I said to her, because I had started the first comedy club in Chicago, a place called Le Pub. There were no comedy clubs in Chicago. And I convinced an owner there of a nightclub, a restaurant, could we start a comedy room there? So I had MC'd there. So I said to her, "I could also MC if you need an MC." She said, "Well, yeah, well, that's something." Because a lot of guys didn't want to MC, but I knew that I could, you could get up, open, do a few jokes, do your little set, then you could bring up the other acts. But each act you dismissed, you can do maybe another joke while you set up the next act. So it gave me more stage time. Anyhow, that all worked out, and that got me going, until I became a regular, and then I became at one time one of the stars of the Comedy Store. I was working every night with all these unknown comedians: David Letterman, Jay Leno, Robin Williams, Gallagher, Michael Keaton. The girl waiting tables was Deborah Winger,
Wow.
Working with Elaine Boozler. This was the show every night. I don't know whatever happened to those people, but I'm on the show with you. I'm on This Is You Not Untied. This is Untied.
So being I was going to ask, you probably saw like all of, those people come through and go and, emceeing there, so like Michael Keaton, I mean, even him I felt like that was crazy because like I saw some old clips of him doing stuff. I'm like, he's a phenomenal comedian. And then I didn't even know that because like I grew up knowing him as Batman, so I was like, oh, that's Batman. And then I'm like, Batman did stand up before he was Batman. And he had that Bazooka Joe joke that I would butcher it, but he's kills. And like things like that. I was like, wow, I'm like, you got to sit and you had a front row seat through all of these people who are your peers that, you were like watching like legends be made by Mitzi Shore. I mean, it was an incredible time, and I broke out before the other guys. I did the Tonight Show before Jay and before Dave.
And in fact, they talk about it all the time when they talk about me, that they were in the kitchen at the Comedy Store watching my first appearance on the Tonight Show. And so I broke out first, but I would always go back there whenever, I was working in Vegas. Let me digress. When I first got on the Tonight Show, I just hustled the talent coordinators as much as I could to come and see me. I didn't have a manager in those days, but I had been a salesman. I sold life insurance at one time in my life, and I knew how to sell. So I sold Craig Tennis and another guy named Paul Black. They were the talent coordinators of the Tonight Show to come and see me. It took a long time, but I finally got them to come and see me. And the night they came to see me, I was auditioning with a comedy team named Baum and Eston. Bruce later became Bruce Baby Baum Eston. And Larry Eston was a writer on Cheers later on. They were a comedy team, and a new kid named Billy Crystal. I don't know what happened to Billy, but if you find him, try to get him on the show and help out his career. But nonetheless, that night, I had to go on in front of about 20 people and make this guy laugh. And it worked. He got me on the Tonight Show. He said, "You're on next week." I went there and I got bumped. I got makeup. They brought me down to the green room and ready to bring me on. They said, "We ran out of time. Come back next week." I came back next week. You don't eat for another week, and you fret and worry. 26 million people watched that show. One appearance on that show could launch your career. 26 million people watch that show. Now, the second time I get there, they put me in makeup up to my dressing room, back down to the green room. We ran out of time. Come back next week. That's the third week. I did 3 weeks in a row. The fourth week I go there. By this time, everybody back home didn't believe I was ever going to be on the Tonight Show, but by this time, I'm sitting in makeup, and the producer came in, Fred Dakota. He said, "I got bad news for you." I said, "What?" He said, "You're going on tonight." Now you get a lump in your throat, the size of a grapefruit, and now they come and get me out of the green room, and they take me to that long walk. I'm standing behind that curtain, and like I say, 26 million people watch that show. The music is playing. Doc Severinsen's in commercial break. They're in commercial, so Doc Severinsen's playing music. And when the music stops, you're walking out. So I'm back there. The coordinator leaves you alone. You're all alone. And now I'm thinking, I can't remember my first line. What's my first joke? now I'm talking to God one-on-one. Oh, God, you brought me this far. Don't let me, please stay with me right now. Now that if I bomb, not only who watched that show, every coordinator watched that show. Vegas buyers watched that show. Singers, all the singers who wanted a clean comedian to open for them, singers in our industry were watching that show. And my mother had everybody back in Harvey, Illinois, watching. If I bomb, I can't even go back home. So anyhow, the music stops and my heart stops. And I hear Johnny say, "We're back now." And I'm glad you're in such a good mood tonight, because my next guest is making his first appearance on the Tonight Show. Will you welcome, please, Tom Dreesen? Now, that one line, "I'm glad you're in such a good mood tonight," he set the tone.
Yeah.
This guy's coming out for his first time. They open up that curtain, you walk out, you can't see the audience, bright lights hit you. There's a spot on the floor you got to hit at a green tape mark. You hit that spot, you can't see the audience, they're applauding, and you get that first joke out, and it got a laugh. And then you did the second joke, and it got a laugh. Then I did the third joke, and it got a laugh. And the fourth joke, I heard Johnny and Ed McMahon laughing behind me. Now I get applause. I end up getting 8 applause. I finished with, I said, "You've been a wonderful audience. This has been my first appearance on the Tonight Show. And show business is a tough life. So if you like me, just if you like me and you're Protestant, say a prayer. If you're Catholic, light a candle. If you're Jewish, somebody in your family owns a nightclub. Tell them about me. Will you please?" And I say goodnight. I walk out. I go through the curtain, and the coordinator, Craig Tennis, come running around the corner. He said, Go back. Johnny wants you back. Go back. I said, "Go back and sit by Johnny." He said, "Don't go back and sit by Johnny. Just go back." So I go back through the curtain for a second bow, and Johnny gave me that little circle that he always did, when he scored. And I never stopped working from that moment. I ended up doing 61 appearances on the Tonight Show. After that, I was doing Dinah Shore, Merv Griffin, Mike Douglas, Johnny Carson, Midnight Special, Rock Concert, Soul Train, American Bandstand. I was doing $20,000 Pyramid, Match Game. I was doing sitcoms as acting. I was the only white comedian ever to do Soul Train, because I later did an album in front of an all-black audience called That White Boy Is Crazy. Well,
Tom,
also, I'm sorry, Shani, but also I started touring with Sammy Davis Jr. Saw me, took me on the road. The singers, Mac Davis, Tony Orlando and Don, James Darren, Frankie Avalon, Gladys Knight DePips, Natalie Cole. They were all asking me to come and tour with them because they wanted a comedian that wouldn't offend their audiences, for family audience. In those days, there was no cable television. You couldn't say damn or hell on stage, you know. So
Right.
I was working so much. At one time, I was on an airplane heading west, and I looked out the window. I saw myself on a plane going east. You know.
so Tom, I got a question. So
Sure.
from your start or your days in Chicago to then begging to be on stage at the Comedy Store, then to finally your first appearance at on Carson, like, did it hit you that like your perception of yourself, like you're like, I finally did it? Or was it like, what, I'm curious at that moment where it was like defining like a huge sigh of relief, like, holy hell, like I'm here, I did it. Like when the perception became a reality for you.
Well, obviously, after that first appearance on the Tonight Show, that you scored there, you know, because a lot of people didn't. That was a real moment, a revelation that hey, I had arrived. I arrived in the business. But all of a sudden, there's a great pressure that comes afterward. And now what?
Yeah, you have to
You know, a
keep
lot
it
of
up.
guys. Yeah, a lot of guys could come up with 2 or 3 Tonight Shows, but could you come up with 10 Tonight Shows or 20 Tonight Shows? Or, you know, keep doing it, keep coming up with new material. Dick Cavett years ago wrote a very funny thing about, he was working at Mr. Kelly's in Chicago as a new comedian, and that opening night, and I've been there, I opened at Mr. Kelly's. In those days, all the press was a Variety, Hollywood Reporter, the Chicago Tribune, the Chicago Daily News, the Chicago Sun-Times, the Herald American. All the critics were in that room. And so you score, you got over. Now you're in your dressing room and you say, I did it, man. I did it. I scored. I did it. I got it. And a little while later, you hear knock, knock, knock. Mr. Dreesen, 5 minutes. You go, oh shit, I got to do it again.
Oh man.
All I did was impress that audience that night. Okay, now you got to do it again.
Wow.
That's what happens to you when you get in our business. You realize that it's not a 10K. You know, it's a 54-mile relay. It's a long run, and you got to keep that work ethic going, and you got to keep reinventing yourself with different kind of material and new material. You know. But you know, again, the exhilaration of that night, it's hard to describe. When I came off that stage, you know, that everything that I had worked for all those years was for that moment. There's a song that I never forget that a girl named Dana Winter sings it, but so did Whitney Houston. One Moment in Time. And when you're standing behind that curtain, that all of my dreams are a heartbeat away. You know, if you can answer that one moment in time. And this is that athletes talk about it. They call it seize the moment. There's sometimes a baseball player, he's hitting 142. He's going back to the minors. He may never play again. Somebody got injured. Somebody else got injured. And all of a sudden he's up with bases loaded. And that's that moment he has to seize. And if he seizes that moment, his life is going to change forever. And that's what happens behind that curtain.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really quick before we get too far away from the Comedy Store, you actually supported the strike when they weren't paying the comedians. What was that like, the environment of like being there during that time? Is something that they now talk about in documentaries, and you're like, nah, that was my life, I was there. So
what
like,
happened, every time I'd come back off the road, I would go to the Comedy Store, you know, and keep working on new material for the Tonight Show, for all the other shows I was doing. So as soon as I'd come out touring with Sammy Davis or whoever I was touring with, as soon as I came off, I'd call the Comedy Store and call in for times. And whenever you went to the Comedy Store, you went to the original room, what they called it, the original room, about 118 people in that room. And you sat. Now, in the meantime, Mitchie had bought another section of that building out. That place used to be Ciro's, a very famous place in Hollywood many years ago. But now a guy named Art LeBeau was running a 50s club in there, and Mitzi bought him out. So she had a 400-seater there, and Rodney Dangerfield would appear there and get the door. Jackie Mason would get the door. You know, if they charged $30 at the door, 400 seats, they made themselves $12,000 for the night, you know, something like that. And she took the drinks and liquor. So it was over 400 seats. So, but that was for those people. When I came off the road one time, I signed up and they said, I walked into the original and I said, "Oh, Tom, you're in the main room." I said, "I'm in the main room." They said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, I go over to the main room," and on stage was David Letterman, Jay Leno, Elaine Boozler, Robin Williams, and me, and Jay Leno. That was a night, and I'm on stage and I'm thinking, wow, I feel like I'm back in Vegas in this big room, but I didn't think much of it. And afterward, everybody would go over to a restaurant called Cantor's, and all the comics would hang out. As you know, comics love to hang out till the wee hours of the morning. But so they were telling stories and everything. And in comes Jay Leno, and he's saying, "Man, this is bullshit. This is bullshit." He said, "We filled that room. Maybe it took 5 of us, but we filled that room as much as any headliner done, and we get nothing. This is bullshit. We should be getting paid." Now they start talking about, I'm making money. By the time I'm making 6 figures a year, I'm doing great. But they're my friends, and I'm listening to them. And they decide they're going to have a meeting about a strike. So not about a strike. They weren't talking about a meeting about getting paid. So they go to the meeting, and I go to the meeting because they're my friends. I was home off the road, and all they did, they were arguing and going back and forth. And it was so, if you've ever been in a room with 120 comedians, it was madness, But all they decided at that meeting was they were going to have another meeting. So I go to the second meeting, and it's just as bad. They're all talking. And finally, I had been in the JCs. That's how I met Tim Reid. I was in the Junior Chamber of Commerce. I knew how to conduct a meeting. I knew Robert's Rules of Order and how to chair a meeting. So I got up and I said, chairing the meeting, I said, let me get this organized. And I started chairing the meeting. Okay, hold your point. Hold on, Gallagher. Hold on. Jay Leno, Jay, take the floor. Jay, make your point. Okay, let's put that in the form of a motion. And I started organizing them. When you organize those young, brilliant minds, they were a force to be reckoned with. They got organized. And I finally went to Mitzi and I told her the comedians want to get paid. And there was under no circumstances was she ever going to pay the comedians. I begged her. I talked to her. I told her why. One night I went over to her home with Paul Mooney, with George Miller and Tim Thomerson. And we stayed up there for like 6 hours and could not convince her to pay the comedians. Wow. I finally went to her one night. I couldn't sleep all night long. And I woke up in the middle of the night. I had this idea. I went to her office in the morning. I said, "Mitzi, I got it. You're charging $5 at the door. Charge $6 at the door. Let the comedians have that $1. If 200 people show up, they split $200. If 500 people, they split $500. If 50 people, the comedians of the night split $50. She said, "No, they don't deserve to be paid. They're not ready to be paid." Now that's when I was numb because I thought it was about money. If it was about money, we could resolve this issue. It was about control. When you pay the slave isn't a slave anymore. But that's a terrible analogy. But my point was that I was numb. Now I realized I went back and told the community she's not going to pay. They decided they wanted to go on strike. The last thing I want to do is get involved in a strike. I had $50,000 of work coming up just with Sammy Davis Jr. with about 5 or 6 dates that I was going out on the road with them. Anyhow, long story short, they voted on it. I called Mitzi one more time. I said, "Please, Mitzi, the comedians want to go on strike. Would you mind paying them?" Can I swear on the show?
Yeah,
yes, sir.
Say whatever you want.
Okay, well, this is her answer. There were all the people at my house. She said, "Not one red fucking cent." So I said to the comedians, I said, "Mitzi's not going to pay." And they all said, "Strike." That night they went on strike. Now, we had committees. I helped set up committees. Steve Bluestein was in charge of publicity. He got all ABC, NBC, CBS. He got everybody out there, all on that night of the strike, and it became news coast to coast, worldwide, in England and all over wherever there was comedy rooms. This place, Now I became like Jimmy Hoffa. I really didn't want to do this. And now they voted. The comedian said, "We should not have all the comedians talking to the media. It will discombobulate our issue. Let's vote for one person." And Dottie Archibald said, "I'll let Tom Dreesen do it." I was more like the senior comedian, so I became the spokesperson for them. I thought it would be over, and it would have been over in 24 hours if all the comedians stayed united. 18 comedians, most of the comedians stayed united. 18 comedians, 18 guys and one girl, 19 people crossed the picket line. And because they weren't big names at the time or anything, but when they crossed the picket line, they kept the place open. Had they not done that, it would have been over in 24 hours. But it lasted 8 weeks, and it got ugly, and arguments and fights, and it just really got ugly. And after about 8 weeks, I had just about had it. I turned down all the work with Sammy, and I told Sammy what I was doing. He said, I understand, Tom, it's the right thing to do, but don't worry, you'll have a job with me when this is over. But I'm thinking it's going to be a week or two. I didn't know it was going to last forever. And I'm going to digress for a minute. I'm a street guy. I don't have a degree from academia, but I got a doctorate from the streets. I grew up on the streets. When I got into a fight, I've been beat, but once the fight started, I want to win, and I don't quit. In sports, in every sport I ever played, basketball, football, baseball, once the game starts, I want to win. You know, I boxed when I was in the service. Once the fight started, I wanted to win. And that's what was happening here. I wasn't going to give up. And now after about 8 weeks, Screen Actors Guild wanted me to speak to their membership and about this issue, because it was on all the papers and everything. And they asked for the Comedy Store to send over Mitzi's argument, and I would debate them. Me and a guy named Mark Lanau and his wife, Joanne, we represented our side, and a guy named Biff Maynard and Danny Mora represented the Comedy Store. So we got up to debate. And Biff Maynard, God rest his soul, a big tough guy, been in prison, but he was a comedian too. You know? Big tough guy. But anyhow, he got up, and I'm going to try to make this short, but all during the strike, after about 4 weeks into the strike, Mitzi decided that she called me and said, I'll pay you on weekends, on Fridays and Saturdays, but Monday through Thursday and Sunday, I don't pay anything to comedians. Well, I took that offer back to the comedians saying, I would take it. I think it's a great idea. They said, no, anytime you have a cover charge, we think you should pay the comedians anytime they perform. So I said, Mitzi, they want to be paid every time you have a cover charge. In those days, they thought cover charge meant cover the cost of entertainment, and which we found out later it didn't, but nonetheless. So now, while we were on strike, she started paying those who crossed the picket line $25 on Friday night and $25 on Saturday night. So Biff Maynard gets up, and the first thing he says to this room full of artists, actors, he said, comedians are artists, and artists don't need to be paid for their art. Well, he was talking to a room full of artists. That didn't go over very big. And then he just was going on and on about comedians shouldn't be paid. I got up and I said, we've been walking this picket line for almost 8 weeks. In the meantime, Mitzi decided to pay on weekends because of our efforts. This man that just got up here worked Friday and Saturday night, and he made $50. Do you know what he did with that $50? Tonight, he went and had dinner at a restaurant, and then he put gas in his car to drive over here and tell you that you shouldn't pay us. You know, so it got like a standing ovation. And afterward, the president of Screen Actors Guild said to me and Biff, we're going to take a full-page ad out in Variety and the Hollywood Reporter telling everybody and actors in our guild not to go to the Comedy Store to honor that picket line because they're not paying you. I go back to the Comedy Store. Everybody's walking the picket line. And as I get out of the car, they're all saying, oh, what happened? I'm telling them what Screen Actors Guild is going to do. Meanwhile, in the driveway by the Comedy Store, if you know the Comedy Store, there's a little driveway there. Mitzi had gotten an injunction that we couldn't picket across that parking, that driveway, she was right. We shouldn't be blocking the driveway. So I see Biff Maynard facing his car east, racing the engine, rom, rom, rom on Sunset Boulevard. And cars are going west, so he can't pull in there yet. And I look, and a couple of the comedians are standing in the driveway, and I holler, get out of there, get out of the driveway, get out. And I hear, car screeching, goes in, and I hear a boom. And he goes to the back of the Comedy Store, and Jay Leno is laying on the ground. And the girls start crying and screaming, he hit Jay, he hit Jay, he hit Jay. Now, I'm yelling, call an ambulance. We didn't have cell phones in those days, you know. I'm yelling, call an ambulance. But at that point, guys, I am at my breaking point. I can't take it anymore. 8 weeks of this fucking bullshit, arguing about paying these comedians it's a minimal amount. I'm at my breaking point. When Biff gets out of that car, I'm going to break his fucking jaw. Now, he was nobody to fool with. He was a big, tough guy. But at that point, I had it. I just had it with all this bullshit. I kneeled down to see how Jay's doing. And he opened one eye and he winked at me. And he went back like he was out again. I said, you son of a bitch. What happened was he didn't get hit. When the car went by, he hit the car with the side of his hand as hard as he could. Boom! And he fell down. Now he's laying there like he's dead. Now Biff comes running out of the car and everybody's saying, "You hit Jay." He said, "No, I didn't mean it. I didn't mean it. You're son of a..." Now we hear woo, 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 sirens coming, ambulance. Now the ambulance comes and they're going to take Jay away, but Jay didn't want to go. He said, "Oh, I'm okay, I think." But they can't release you. They have to take you to a hospital. Only the hospital can release you. So they haul Jay off in the ambulance. A few moments later, I think it was Argus Hamilton came outside. He said, "Tom, Mitzi wants to talk to you." I went inside. She said, "Let's settle this right now, once and for all." And we got our attorney there, a guy named Ken Browning that Dave Letterman recommended to us. It was his lawyer. And we settled it that night. And the tragedy of that is, and then I'll end this, was after about 3 weeks, the comics were all going back. I gave a farewell speech to all of them and said, "I'm done. I'm finished. I wish you all the best, but I got to go back to work and everything." And we came outside. I had to catch a plane that day. My ex-wife was with me. What was her name again? Oh yeah, Plaintiff. But I had an audition to go to. They wanted me to host a show called Real People. I didn't want to do that, but I had to meet with the guy, George Slaughter, and then I had to catch a plane. So as I'm leaving, all these comics are getting around me, talking to me, and one was Steve Lebetkin, a wonderful young comedian that who walked the picket line with us. And they're all trying to talk to me. And my wife kept saying, "We got to go. You got to catch a plane." And Lebetkin said, "Tommy, please don't leave the group. If you leave the group, she'll retaliate." I said, "No, it's in the contract. She can't do that. We put in the contract, anybody who walked the picket line, you can't retaliate against." He said, "Tom, I've called in 3 weeks in a row. She won't give me any time slots." I said, "Steve, she will. She'll give you time slots. Don't worry about it." And he looked so forlorn. And I said to him, "Steve," my wife kept saying, "We got to go." I finally grabbed him by the shoulders. I said, "Steve, I won't go back till you go back. I give you my word. I won't go back till you go back." He said, all right. Now I go and I'm working in Lake Tahoe with Sammy Davis Jr. Another week goes by. Steve Lebetkin called in for times again and she turned him down. I'm ready to go on stage one night and Jay Leno calls me in my dressing room. He said, "Tom, Steve Lebetkin committed suicide. He went to the top of the Continental Hyatt House and he wrote a suicide note. It was next to the Comedy Store, the Continental Hyatt House. He wrote a suicide note. "My name is Steve Lebetkin. I used to work at the Comedy Store." And he jumped off the top of the building and landed on the ramp next to the Comedy Store, and of course died. And I was, Jay thought I had just gotten off stage. He didn't know I had to go on stage. That was the hardest show I ever had to do in my life that night, because I started thinking, had I never got involved in this bullshit, this stupid bullshit about paying comedians something, had I not gotten involved, maybe that kid would still be alive. I started putting it on me, but it wasn't anybody's fault. He was forlorn, I'll tell you something strange. Every year on the anniversary of his death for 2 years, everybody thought it was his girlfriend. They laid a dummy on the ramp where he landed with a sign around its neck saying, "My name is Steve Lebetkin. I used to work at the Comedy Store." They did it 2 years in a row. A lot of people thought it was his girlfriend. No one knew who was doing it, But in fact, there's a book written about it called "I'm Dying Up Here," which is a double entendre. It's by William Needlesheater. It's a double entendre because comedians, when we don't do well, you say, "I died last night, I'm dying up here." And of course, Steve Lebetkin committed suicide. So that's all in the book. Anyhow, that was the end of that story. It's over. I never went back to the Comedy Store for over 40 years. I kept my word to Steve Lebetkin that I wouldn't go back. But then Mike Binder got a hold of me, one of the comics who was with us in those days. He actually crossed the picket line, but he later came back to apologize and said that he didn't do right, and he wished he would have stayed with us. He was directing and producing the Comedy Store special that I think you guys may have seen. It was 5 episodes. And
Yeah.
so he asked me would I come back just for one show that he could film me, and I did. And I'm glad I did. And by the way, Mitzi's son Peter Shore called me and asked me to come back too. So.
Wow. So, man, what a story! First of all, rest in peace to Steve Lebetkin. Second of all, you deserve a Nobel Peace Prize for the amount of shit you put up with at the Comedy Store, because that's crazy. Third, while that was all going on, you never thought about changing careers to be a divorce lawyer, because it's pretty much like what you did the whole time.
Well, I have to tell you, the first week, all the comedians were gung ho. Hey, man, we're going to do this. But after she dug in and people crossed the picket line, a lot of those comedians started getting very, very nervous. Are we ever going to? This was, again, it was a great showcase club. The Improv had just started up at that time. And so, and there's another story in there that Mitzi called her loyalists together for a meeting one night. We had a waitress there that was she was our spy. She was an undercover agent she would come to us and tell us all the things that they talked about at these private meetings. And what happened was one night Mitzi said the comedians are going to go on strike, and Biff Maynard and Ollie Joe Prater were in the back of the room. And they said, comedians won't go on strike. They need a place to work. And Mitzi said, they may go over to the improvisation. And Ollie Joe Prater said, what if there was no improvisation? And 2 days later, somebody threw a Molotov cocktail on top of the roof of the Improv and burned it down.
My gosh.
And we all know who did that, But Bud Friedman came to me and he said, Tom, if you comedians go on strike, I need to rebuild my place. We could still work in the front of the Improv. The whole back burned down, but they could still set up a small stage. And he said, please don't go on strike on me. I said, but comedians don't want to go on strike. Will you sign a memo that you will pay the comedians once you get rebuilt, that you will sit down and discuss a fair price? He said, absolutely. And he signed the memo. And so when we were walking a picket line, we'd send people over there to work over there. When customers would come up, we'd say, please, can you honor our picket line? But we're all working at the Improv later on. And Biff Maynard, just before he died, admitted to me what really went down. People say today, "Oh, it didn't happen that way." Bullshit. I know it happened. But it was a crazy time. I have to tell you, when I look back over my life, I think back of that era, and I'm proud of what those kids did, because I'll tell you something else. Comedy clubs are just starting. Keep this in mind. When I started in show business, there were no comedy clubs in America. And a few years later, there were 550. Tulsa, Oklahoma had 3 in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So there were comedy clubs all over the country. And what they were doing was paying the comedians either nothing or very little. And if they say they had a good comedian come the weekend, they might give them $100 for the whole weekend. Once we won the strike, they all had to fall in line and pay a little bit more, because a comedian could stay in LA, work the Comedy Store and the Improv, and go out for commercials, audition for shows and stuff, and stay in LA and survive. So all across the country, those comedy clubs had to raise their pay. The improvisation in New York, Bud's wife, who won it in a divorce, she won the club, and she told me, she said, Tom, once you guys won in LA, the comedians in New York wanted to be paid. I sat down with them, we negotiated, and we got it done. In London, England, we got people from London, England sent us letters thanking us, comedians, that they start paying in London. So it had worldwide ramifications for the comedians.
So yeah, you literally were the beginning of a movement for comedians.
Yeah, I remember one time, it was so funny, a young kid, a buddy of mine was with me, and a young kid walked up to me outside the improvisation. It's a new kid from Baltimore, a comedian. He's a pretty funny kid too. And he walked up to me, he said, hey, Tom Dreesen, somebody told me when you guys started out, you worked for free. You went on stages for free. I said, yeah. He said, boy, first day I ever went on stage, I got paid. I said, congratulations.
You should have said you're welcome. That was me. Yeah, you should have said you're welcome.
But which comedy club did you say that was that you went and met with after she got the club in the divorce?
It was Silver Friedman, Bud Friedman's wife. She went in the divorce. She got the New York Improv.
Okay.
And Bud kept the Hollywood Improv.
Because and that's how. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, because I was going to say, isn't that how Mitzi got the Comedy Store? She got it in her divorce?
Yes. Sammy Shore, her husband, owned it. But I have to say this, Mitzi was brilliant. And I love Mitzi. I can't tell you how it hurt me that we had these back and forth discussions, because I thought the world of her. By the way, she gave me that shot. If I didn't get on the Comedy Show, I probably would have never got on the Tonight Show. I never forgot that. I used to do radio interviews. Mitzi was very shy, and her publicist would ask me to do radio interviews for the Comedy Show, and I'd take Mitzi with me because she was shy about speaking. But if I was with her, But her husband Sammy, he had a comedy room there, the Comedy Store. But anybody could get up and do an hour. You could do 40 minutes. It was very disorganized. But Missy turned it into a Ford assembly line. She, when I started on show business, if you'd have told me, hey, Tom, you're going to work tonight, but you're going to follow 5 comedians, I said, I ain't following 5 comedians. No one follows 5 comedians. Now you're following 18 comedians at the Comedy Store. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
She came up with that brilliant idea. Each comic do 15 minutes or so, and weekends maybe do 20, but she'd do like 2-3 different shows. And it worked. It was an assembly line and it worked, She was the genius behind all that.
So, Tom, speaking of the Comedy Store, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you were on the basketball team and a softball team there, and then in the Navy you boxed, and then later on you golfed. Did I get that timeline right?
Yeah. And I played football. I played basketball on an all-black basketball team when I was growing up. I used to do routines about it. I was the only white kid on an all-black basketball team. They nicknamed me Spot. I said 14 black guys in me. I didn't get in one game for 3 years. They finally put me in one afternoon, and no one would pass me the ball. They claimed they couldn't see me in the daytime.
That's great. Well, I was curious with the comedians that you played with at the Comedy Store. Were any of them like you were just surprised by their athleticism, and you're like, "Holy hell, I'm glad you're on my team"?
Oh well, we the Comedy Store basketball. I went to Mitzi when I was at Comedy Store, and I wanted to start a team called the Comedy Store Bombers. And she bought uniforms for us, and we played. We had like 17 games one year. We had a comedy team called Roger and Roger Peltz and Roger Bear. Roger Peltz played at University of Louisiana or something like that. University of Kentucky, I think it was. He was a center, big, tall guy. Paul Mooney's sons, Daryl and Dwayne Mooney, were a comedy team, and they were real good point guards. The only problem was they only passed the ball to each other. If we wanted the ball, we had to steal it from the Mooney twins. But I was usually a guard, but I played forward with Johnny Witherspoon. Johnny was a real good basketball player. We played a lot of one-on-one basketball. Dave Letterman was a forward, and Dave was a very good basketball player. He would always poo-poo it that he was, but he was a good basketball player. Jimmy Walker at that time was a good basketball player. Daryl Igas. We had. I'm leaving out some guys, but Lou Deck and we had a lot of good basketball players.
Well, and then later on at the Bob Hope Classic, I saw you played with Arnold Palmer, Jack Nicklaus, Peter Jacobson, and John Daly, and then I also saw that you actually played with Tiger Woods. But I'm very curious because I literally just got into golf. I know a handful of names. I'm not a huge golf nerd, I guess, as you would say, but I literally just started playing it with my brother. It's super fun. But I know who John Daly is, and I know that John Daly is a partier, to say the least. So I was curious if you had any stories with John Daly while golfing with him. He
was my partner in the AT&T. I'll get back to John Daly in a minute. I caddied as a boy, so I love golf. I grew up in the streets. Going to a golf course was a whole new world for me. When I was growing up, I always thought I wanted to own a tavern because that's where my father spent all of his money. When I went to caddy at Ravislow, where I caddied at this club, they sent 2 kids to college every year on the Evans Scholarship. I was in this environment I had never been before. I was caddying for lawyers and doctors and Mr. Florsheim, very wealthy people, and they treated me not like a slave or something. They treated me like a son, and I just was a whole new world. All of a sudden, after a few years, I started dreaming maybe I could be more than just a tavern owner. That's why I understand when young kids in the ghetto want to grow up to be a pimp or a drug pusher, because that's the only person they've ever seen with a lot of money and success. They've never been outside that environment. So it made sense to me, So I love golf, but I didn't play it for years. I went in the military, didn't play for years. I got married when I came out of the service, had a wife, 3 kids. I'm working construction. My buddies would say, "You want to play golf on Sunday?" Yeah. Well, we're teeing off at 6:30. We get up at 5. I ain't doing that shit. 6:30. So now when I'm touring with Sammy Davis Jr., Sammy had a golf tournament called the Sammy Davis Jr. Pro-Am in Hartford, Connecticut. And Ping was his sponsor, the manufacturer of Ping, And I one day was on the golf course with him, just riding around the cart. He had a cart that was like a apartment on wheels. It had a bar, it had a television set, and I'm just riding around with him. But I was swinging one of his clubs. He said, "Tommy, you got a good swing. Do you golf?" I said, "Well, I played when I was a kid." He ended up buying me a set of Ping woods and irons and had them in my dressing room as a gift, And then Bob Hope invited me to the Bob Hope Classic. He saw me on the Tonight Show one night and invited me. And I got up in that first tee, and there's like 8,000 people lining up the fairway and everything. And the guy's announcing, ladies and gentlemen, now on the tee, Mr. Tom Dreesen. My knees were shaking. And what am I doing? You know, but so I started taking the game serious. And then I played in the Bob Hope Classic for years and years and years. I later became the master of ceremonies for the Bob Hope Classic. I played in the Frank Sinatra Celebrity Invitational. I was a master of ceremonies for 30 years and played in that every year. Then I also was on a tour. There was a tour called the Celebrity Players Tour. It was basketball, baseball, football, hockey, tennis, and show business people that were 10 handicap or below. So it was Johnny Bench, Mike Schmidt, Mario Lemieux, John Elway, Dan Marino, Michael Jordan. We had 42 Hall of Famers.
Wow.
In show business, it was me, it was Matt Lauer, Brian Gumbel, Smokey Robinson, Eddie Marinero, Frankie Avalon, you know, show business people. I was the only comedian on that tour. We did 12 cities a year and they paid you. You know, Rick Rhoden won over $2 million on our tour, a former pitcher in baseball.
Oh,
and so I always said I was the leading money winner I was a leading money winner among stand-up comedians on the Celebrity Players Tour. And they say, well, how many are there? I said, I'm the only comedian on the Celebrity Players Tour. But to get back, before I get to John Daly, during that time, I'm flying with Frank Sinatra all over the world in his private jet, doing shows in front of 20,000 seat arenas and living in Frank Sinatra's world. And when I wasn't doing that, I was playing golf with all these athletes. If somebody would have told me when I was a little boy on my hands and knees, shining shoes and bars, one day, you hear that guy in the jukebox? Come fly with me. You're going to be flying with him all over the world and gracing the same stage with him. And you're going to get inside an arena and you're going to compete with the greatest athletes who ever lived in your lifetime. I'd have said, that's impossible. That's absolutely impossible. But here I was doing just that. So every time they came to me with a sitcom, I turned it down. Every time they offered.
Yeah.
Christopher Morley said, Christopher Morley, the author, said, success is living the life you want. And I was living the life I wanted. I mean, I was touring with Frank Sinatra. I'm competing with all these great athletes. It was just that catch me out. And John Daly, whenever you go to the AT&T, Clint Eastwood is a good buddy of mine, and he invited me to the AT&T, and I became the master of ceremonies for the AT&T and did shows every year we do it. But they hook you up with a pro. So it's a celebrity and a pro. And you know, if I'm out of the hole, if I'm laying six and my pro makes a birdie, we're one under. You know, if I get a shot on this hole, you know, so we match the scores, right? John Daly was my partner for like 4 years. And I always say, this is what John Daly taught me. He once said to me, Tom, 24 cans of beer in a case, 24 hours in a day. Coincidence? I don't think so. Because that boy could drink. That boy, you know, he's still my friend. He calls me all the time. You know?
I mean, and he's still throwing it back. I remember hearing this story. I'm definitely going to mess it up, but he was somewhere prepping for a tournament, and Tiger Woods walked by him, and he was like, "Hey, come get a drink." Tiger was like, "I gotta go. I gotta get in the weight room." And then Tiger gets his workout in, and then he walks past John again at the bar. John's like, "Hey, come get a drink." Tiger's like, "No, I got to go get my shots in." And then eventually they played the next day, and Tiger did not perform well when Daly performed amazing. I think he was like one of the top finishers, but Tiger then came over to John and was like, "You know what? I might have to start drinking more if I'm going to continue to play like that." So.
Yeah. But in the long run, Tiger went out, but it's true about John. John is just one of those great country boy characters who not only hit a golf ball far, people didn't realize what a great short game he had. He had a great short game, but he's a funny guy. And he'll call me 2:00 in the morning. "Hey, Drees, I'm at a bar, and this guy next to me loves Frank Sinatra. And I told him I knew you. He didn't believe I knew you. Drees, tell him a Frank Sinatra story." John, it's 2:00 in the morning. I got to get up 6 and catch a plane. No, well, you can always tell him a story, and I'll end up doing that. You know.
That's awesome. So do you think that you like being in like around that tavern saloon environment, like as a kid, do you think that kind of made it easier to like interact with, you know, like as a young kid going to the Comedy Store and, you know, kind of starting out doing that and being on the younger side and it was just, do you think it was easier to communicate with the adults and kind of get them to take you seriously? Because you had that, like, I've been around this scene, because I always say, like you said, comedians love to do all their business and stuff in a bar. Like, everything takes place in a bar, and they got a bar in the comedy club and they got a bar in this. And so all, like, it just kind of, do you think that was played
Yeah,
a part?
I think for me, it certainly developed my personality. I was a bartender when I came out of the service in the same bar my mother had been a bar in. It had a new owner, and I attended bar in two different places. One bar was a lot of couples would come in, and the other bar you served 2 beers and broke up a fight, and you served 2 beers and you broke up a fight. Doing that all night long. But growing up in that environment, it develops character, or it won't. Could destroy your character, or it develops your character. It depends on your personality. First, let me digress from it. 85% of all, this is my humble opinion, 85% of all stand-up comedians I've met in my life are insecure, neurotic, sometimes psychotic, loved, starved wrecks, total, absolute wrecks. And the other 15% are gifted, confident people who say, I know how to write a joke and I know how to tell a joke. I like to think that I'm in the latter, but never trust somebody that tells you they're sane. But so when you're around comedians, I don't want to make this dark, but I've known 5 great stand-up comedians who committed suicide. I know another 20 comedians who destroyed themselves with drugs and alcohol that were funny people, and that's why I give motivation speeches to the comedians. When I did it in Philadelphia, I did it in New York, I did it in Boston, I did it in Chicago, and in LA. I call it, my motivation speech is called The Joy of Stand-Up Comedy and How to Get There. How to enjoy this wonderful journey as a stand-up comedian. If you're an insecure, neurotic, sometimes psychotic, love-starved wreck, when you're poor and unknown, when you're rich and famous, it doesn't get better, it gets worse, because you thought rich and famous was going to take away all that angst that you have. So that's what I talked to them about. I helped them develop this perception, and how to visualize and self-talk, what to say when you talk to yourself, and then develop a sense of humor, learn to laugh at yourself. One of the things I tell comedians, one of the biggest pitfalls all comedians have is that you compare yourself to another comedian. Well, I started out with Scotty, and Scotty's doing the Fallon show, and I was doing it a year before him. I always tell them that there's a great Hindu proverb that said there's nothing noble about being superior to another man. True nobility lies in being superior to your former self. Am I a better friend than I was last year? Am I a better son than I was last year? Am I a better father than I was last year? Am I a better comedian than I was last year? Look over you listen to your tapes, look over your notes. Have you grown it's your only competition your whole life? And I tell them, I said, I stand in front of you and I tell you I'm a success. I'm a success as a stand-up comedian. And you know what my critics would say? Bullshit. You're a success? You started out with David Letterman. You started out with Jay Leno. They got $1 billion and 180 cars and 200 motorcycles, and you call yourself a success? I say, yes, because I never compared myself to David Letterman or Jay Leno. I only wanted to be the best Tom Dreesen that I could be. I didn't want to be better than Jay Leno or better than David Letterman. First of all, in comedy, that's all subjective anyhow. Because who makes you laugh? If you're Aunt Edna makes you laugh, then, she's the funniest person in your world. So comedy is subjective. But learning to enjoy this wonderful journey we're on as stand-up comedians. Guys, I don't want to get on a soapbox here. Look, the insurance companies of America for 8 years went around the world doing the 10 fears of man. What are the 10 fears of man? They did a survey. Death was 4th. Pain was 2nd. Getting up in front of an audience was the number 1 fear of mankind. If you can get up in front of an audience and you can talk about being a house painter for an hour, or a lawyer, or a bricklayer for an hour, you're in less than 1% of the population of the world. If you can get up and make people laugh for an hour, you're in less than 1/millionth of 1% of the population of the world. Do you know how fortunate you are to have this gift? Now, laughter is healing. That's not a theory anymore. It used to be a theory. It's not a theory. We've always known that laughter is psychologically deterrent because the brain can't think of 2 thoughts at the same time. It simply can't function 2 thoughts at the same time. So if you're laughing at a comedian, You're not thinking about your problems. So it's a psychological deterrent. But now, because of Norman Cousins, the man who was the editor of Saturday Review, who was dying of a terminal illness, and the doctors told him it was stress, his heart, that he didn't have long to live, that years of stress was causing this heart ailment. He laid in the hospital. He thought, of negative input, stress made me ill, then positive input should make me well. So he went out of the hospital, and he'd only watch I Love Lucy reruns, Candid Camera, Three Stooges, the Marx Brothers. He would listen to comedy albums. He never watched the evening news. He never picked up the evening newspaper. He lived 27 years after he was told he was going to die.
Wow.
Because of him, UCLA did research on what happens to the human body when it laughs. And when you have this hearty laugh, where you laugh so hard and tears are running down your eyes and you go, oh, this sense of well-being, it's because your body's gone through an actual chemical change. So laughter is not only psychologically deterrent, and it's physiologically therapeutic, then comedians are physicians of the soul. So you guys can call me Dr. Dreesen if you want. But
absolutely, I would believe it. Oh, go ahead.
But that's my point. I tell comedians, that's who you are. Don't waste that. Don't destroy that brain of yours with drugs and alcohol. Don't do that. If you need drugs and alcohol to get you up on stage, you're not really a true comedian. Come from your spirit. Are you nervous? Are you scared? Of course, we all are. You think it's easy to walk out in front of 20,000 people who all came to see Frank? You think I'm whistling Dixie? But we learn to work under those conditions.
So, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, that's it.
So going back to Letterman, and I'm asking this now because I think it's kind of what you just told me and maybe a little bit more. So I'm hoping you can elaborate. He has this quote and it says, Tom was older than the rest of us, had more experience. Tom taught a lot of us what to worry about and what to carry about. Is what what I just quoted him on pretty much what you told him and other comedians, I'm guessing?
Yeah, David and I have been friends from the moment I met him. I don't know. And I tell you, it'll make me tell you a funny story. Yes, I was always there for him for advice. But here's a funny story about Dave. When I first met Dave Letterman, I came off stage at the Comedy Store, and he had just arrived in L.A. He had been a weatherman, in, as you know, in Indianapolis. He had an old red pickup truck. He had no money or anything. But I walked off stage, and he said to me, I really enjoyed your set, Mr. Dreesen. I said, well, thank you very much. I said, what's your name? He said, Dave. I said, oh, hi, Dave. Where you from? He said, Indianapolis. And I'm such an extrovert. I started talking sports. I said, Indianapolis, what baseball team did you root for when you were growing up? And I said, talking sports, He said, I was hoping he'd say the Cubs because I'm a Cub fan, But he said, no, he really kind of for Cincinnati. And I said, I'm so extrovert. I kept taking it to him. Had I known that he was a shy, reclusive kind of guy, I would have respected that. But every time I saw him, hey, Dave, I would take it to him. And before I realized that he was shy, introverted guy, we were friends. I went to play racquetball. I taught him how to play racquetball. He ended up beating me later on. It was amazing how we took to that game. And then basketball. And so we became friends. Now, he calls me a couple months ago. He said, Tom, every time you do an interview, or I do an interview, they'll say, how did you meet Tom Dreesen, or how did you meet Dave? We always tell the same story. You came off at this Comedy Store. I complimented you on your material, and we became friends. I said, yeah. He said, well, it's boring. It's a boring story. I said, but it's true. I don't care if it's boring. From now on, let's tell people you came off stage at the Comedy Store. I stole some material from you, and you beat the shit out of me in the parking lot. I said, now, why would I want to say that? He said, because it's a better story. I said, you got 32 million fans. They'll be chasing me through airports. He said, it's a better story. Now, another couple of weeks go by. He calls me. He said, Tom, do you know the governor of Illinois? I said, I met him, but I don't know him. He said, well, my wife has a friend who her girlfriend lives in Chicago, and she's got a grown son that has autism. And these adults with autism, they plant corn and tomatoes and lettuce and stuff like that. And then when it comes into fruition, they give it to the homeless. And the state is coming to take that property away. And I wanted to call the governor and lobby for him not to do that. I said, well, I don't know him, but I know the Senate Majority Leader there, the president of the Senate is John Colleton, a friend of mine. Let me call him. So I called John and said, oh, Tom, tell Dave not to worry about that. Because of statute, this, that, and the other, whatever you're saying, we're going to take care of that. I said, John, do you mind telling Dave that? Because you explained it better than me. If I give Dave your phone number, he said, sure, I'll take his phone call. I said, oh, John, When Dave calls you and you tell him you're going to help him, tell him the only reason you're helping him is because Dreesen beat the shit out of him in the parking lot.
So got to keep the tail alive.
John's a great sport. So he said, okay, he's a great sport. 10 minutes go by and the phone rings. It's Letterman. I see on the phone. I said, hello. He said, didn't I tell you that's a better story? I told you.
That's awesome. God. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Flip to one of us. Yeah. One
of our cameras went out.
Yeah, I saw that.
That is an amazing story, though.
Yeah, I mean, well, and real quick, while we're on the topic of Letterman, I mean, obviously, I mean, you probably stay in touch. I mean, you do stay in touch, but do you ever are like, hey, Dave, you should take me on a ride in one of your cool cars, or do you ever get to go see all the cool cars, or?
Oh, Jay, I've seen Jay's. Jay's got the great, he's got 2 hangars or 3 hangars full of cars. My girlfriend puts on classic car shows in Arizona. She lives in Arizona, and she wanted to go to Jay's place. And so I called Jay, and he said, yeah. And he took her around with him and me, and just took her to every single car that he has there. It's just amazing. I'm not a car guy, I got to tell you a quick story about that. One day, this is years ago. I just started out, and Jay was there at the Improv, and I had an old green Chevy, and something was wrong with the car. And I was telling Jay about it. He lifted up the hood, and he said, "Oh, I think it's your linkage." I said, well, "What's a linkage?" He said, "You don't know what a linkage is? You're a pussy. What a pussy you are. You don't know what a linkage is." I said, "I don't know what a linkage is. You don't know who Mickey Mantle is." And I'm a pussy. He said, "Next time your car breaks down, call fucking Mickey Mantle." but Dave, no, Dave is not. When I see Dave, we go to dinner, we go out, we talk on the phone. I've never driven in one of his cars, or he's not that kind of guy, to be honest with you. He's very humble about and very self-deprecating. He knocks himself more than anybody, but we're the best friends. I know that if I were to call him and tell him I needed him, he'd be there. I mean, he said, that's the kind of friend he is. We don't talk about it much, but I know that he's always been in my corner. I did his show almost 50 times. Wow. And he never wanted me to do stand-up. In the earlier days when he was at NBC, I'd do stand-up, but he wanted me to come and tell stories. He wanted me to sit down and tell funny stories. And he always wanted a Sinatra story, And I did the show 50 times, but I came prepared. People say to me sometimes, well, Dave let you on the show because you're his friend. I said, yeah, but I came prepared. I knew exactly what he wanted, and I was prepared. I gave him set up questions, and we could hit it out of the park, and he could ad lib with me. And a lot of times we just even ditch the stories because we had so much fun together, so much chemistry together. If you're going to go on a national television show, be prepared. Good a friend as he was, but you look better under his armpit.
I know, right? Don't I? I feel like it's adding to it.
Sorry.
Yeah. So with David Letterman and I knew that I could tell you guys were great friends because it was different every time I watched an interview with you on his show versus anyone else. Like, not that he wasn't good with anyone else. I mean, don't go and tell him you were like, I met these guys in Chicago that were talking bad about your interviews. But no, it was just different. It felt like 2 friends catching up, and my favorite thing was every time you came on, he would always be like, tell me something about Sinatra. It was always, that's what he started with, was like, and it was, I do want to touch on Sinatra a little bit with you. I read something where you said he would cut the binoculars in half and send one of them to.
You got to. The setup of that is.
I know. I want you to do it. That's why I want you to stop me and do that. Yeah.
Frank Sinatra's sense of humor. His bodyguard, Jilly Rizzo, was a tough guy. Had one eye, a glass eye. He had it knocked out in a fight. And Sammy Davis Jr., of course, had one eye, a glass eye. On Christmas, one year, Frank bought a set of binoculars. He sawed it in half, sent one to Jilly and one to Sammy.
But that's a true story, though.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No. Yeah.
So with he used to do funny things. He had a funny bone. He had a sense of humor, not necessarily the self-deprecating. I don't know him on that he had that, but he had a sense of humor in the sense that he could, hang with the best of the comedians and things like that. So
he loved a good laugh. and he loved a good story. And I'll tell you, he had such tremendous respect for stand-up comedians, Frank Sinatra. One time we were touring, we were down in Florida, and in between shows, we were working a big arena. In between shows, we had dinner backstage with a long table, and he had the governor of Florida and his wife. This was a long time ago, and it was a long table, and I was at the end of the table, and I heard the governor's wife say to him, she said, I don't know how you do that every night, that you walk out in front of all those people and you sing those songs. And he said, he's got the toughest job in show business. And he pointed down at the end of the table at me, and I was eating. I looked up, he was pointing at me. He said, that's the toughest job in show business, a stand-up comedian. No orchestra, no arrangement, no special lighting. I always tell everybody, they'll say, what's it like opening for Frank Sinatra? And I'll say, let me put it this way. Scotty, I'll say, Scotty, it's 5 minutes before the show, and there's 20,000 people at the Nassau Coliseum, say, or at the United Center in Chicago, or any. So there's 20,000 people out there, Scotty, and I want you to go out there, and for the next 45 minutes, I want you to hold their attention. Stand in the middle of the arena. They're all around you. It's not in front of you. You're in the center, and they're all around you. I want you to stand out there for 45 minutes and hold their attention. Oh, one more thing. I want you to hold their attention, but I want you to make them laugh for the next 45 minutes. Oh, one more thing. I want you to make them laugh when you want them to laugh. I want you to pull the strings and the emotions of 20,000 people. No props, no tricks, no charts, no special arrangement, no special orchestra, nothing. Just you and 20,000 people. And one more thing, Scotty, not one of them came to see you.
Oh my goodness. I mean, that's painting the picture of pretty much what you did every single night. I'm curious. So obviously you sold out arenas with Frank all the time, but I'm more curious, were there ever nights where you and him, just the two of you, got to escape, go find some corner pub or something, and that was a memorable moment? Or I'm more curious about nights away with Frank, away from the audience and away from the lights and all of that.
Absolutely. First of all, you said you and he sold out. No, he sold out arenas. I didn't sell them out.
Hey, I mean, you brought something too.
Yeah, well, people always say, and for 14 years he opened for Frank Sinatra. And I say, can I correct something? I like to think that Frank closed for me. but and I would tell that joke in front of him and he'd laugh. But yes, in answer to your question, after shows, when we were on the road, we'd always go somewhere, if we were working the Desert Inn in Vegas or something, we'd stay in the coffee shop till 4 or 5 in the morning, but it was always with a group. But when I stayed at his compound down in Rancho Mirage, I'd stay down there 5-6 times a year. He had a huge compound that was all enclosed, and then he had a big main house. He had swimming pools, tennis courts, but he had bungalows all around the outer perimeter that were called New York, Tender Trap, Strangers in the Night, My Way, named after his songs. And I'd stay in one of the bungalows. He'd sometimes get me at 3 o'clock in the morning. He never went to bed till the sun came up. So he'd say, Tommy, let's take a ride. And we'd go right around the desert. Whether we were on the road or off the road, he never went to bed till the sun came up. So at home, we'd ride around the desert, just him and I in a car. And we just open up. And those are really wonderful moments for me, because in those moments, he wasn't the great Frank Sinatra. And I wasn't the comedian Tom Dreesen. He was a kid from Hoboken, New Jersey, I'm sorry. And I was a kid from Harvey, Illinois. And we just started talking about our childhood. And we got, when I first started touring with Frank Sinatra, he was like the boss of the tour, obviously the boss, and he knew everybody's job, and you better know yours, because that show was the most important thing, the show. But then as time went by, he became like a buddy. I'd hang out with him. And toward the end of his life, it was more like a father to me. So these are wonderful moments, being alone with him like that. And I always tell the story. One night, he told me a very personal story. And we're driving around and we're getting ready to pull back into the compound. He said, I shouldn't have told you that. I said, well, it won't go any further than this car. He said, I know, but I shouldn't have told you that. I said, well, like I said, it's not going out of this car. And besides, it isn't like we're strangers, we're friends, And I don't know what made me do it. As I was pulling the compound, I looked at him, I said, strangers in the night, exchanging glances. He said, oh my God, if you're going to sing that song, get in key. He said, for God's sake, get in key. Now he goes, strangers in the night. I say, exchanging glances. He said, wandering in the night. I said, what were the chances? And we start singing the song. Now we pull in the compound and I parked the car. gets out and he always hit me on the cheek. He'd sock me sometimes. Hey, Tommy, love you, pal. He'd say, good night, Tommy. I was going back to my bungalow and I thought, if I went back to my old neighborhood right now in the bar with all the guys, and I said, I was just riding around with Frank Sinatra and we were singing Strangers in the Night, they'd say, get the fuck out of here with that bullshit. But it's true. It happened. And it's a moment I'll never, ever forget. I miss him every day of my life. I swear I do.
That sounds incredible. Is that what ignited the flame of you two casually singing songs together on stage?
Oh, I never sang with Frank on stage.
Oh, I swear I read that you did.
No, only in the car. I wouldn't dare. By the way, you know what? In my dressing rooms tonight, our dressing rooms are always like wherever whatever hotel. I was under contract to 7 different hotels with them. The Golden Nugget, the Desert Inn, the MGM Grand, the Riviera, the Sands, all. But sometimes our dressing rooms were right next to each other, and I'd be in my dressing room getting ready, and I might just be singing, you will be my music, you will be my song. And he would open up my dressing room door and he wouldn't say one word. He'd just look in the dressing room like this. In other words, you're singing next to me. And I'd look at him, I go, oh, you got it. Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
So, Tom, yesterday when we spoke on the phone, we had talked briefly about that part of the book, and I glanced over it, and I feel like you can't really talk about Sinatra without bringing a little bit of that up, at least touching on it. I don't want to give too much away from the book, but where he and Johnny Carson, he had saved Johnny Carson's life.
Yeah. He actually saved Johnny Carson's life from a mafia hit. It's in my book. And the only reason why I would tell this story now, but just a little bit of a longer story, you got to read a book. But Johnny Carson was a wonderful guy and the greatest late night talk show host of all time, I believe. And I love David. And David would say the same thing. David runs a real close second, I'll tell you. But Johnny was a bad drinker. He, by his own admission, I'm going to digress. I was a bartender when I came out of the service. My buddies in the bar, when I was sober, watching them drink all night, most of the guys would either become one of the 3 R's, I like to say it. Like after a couple of drinks, they became Rocky Marciano. They want to fight everybody in the place. Or maybe after a couple of drinks, they became Rudolph Valentino and they wanted to fuck everybody in the place. Or then they became Rip Van Winkle and they just went to sleep. Alcohol affects everybody differently. Frank was Rocky Marciano. He'd get aggressive, after a couple of drinks, and so he's Rocky Marciano. Johnny would get silly. He became this romantic guy, So Johnny Carson, by his own admission, was a bad drinker. And when he was in New York, he had just taken over the Tonight Show like 1.5 years, 2 years. He was just now getting started as a young star. And he went into Jilly's bar one night. Jilly had a bar on West 48th Street. Jilly Rizzo, Frank's bodyguard, was called Jilly's Bar. And the who's who of New York hung out at that bar. All the FBI guys and all the mafia guys. I mean, the cops, the robbers hung out there, movie stars, famous people, politicians. And Johnny Carson went in there one night when a guy named Crazy Joey Gallo was in there. Crazy Joey Gallo, he got his nickname when he was 17 because he killed his first man. Crazy Joey Gallo was a mean, psychotic killer. And there were 5 Dons of New York. If you ever watch the movie The Godfather, you get all this. But the 5 Dons, a Don of like Brooklyn, Queens, Manhattan, the Bronx. There was a Don of every one of those boroughs. And they did not, they ruled those boroughs. Crazy Joey Gallo didn't pay any attention to them. He did whatever he wanted to do when he wanted to do it. He brought, they only wanted like Sicilians and the outfit. He brought black guys into it to run numbers for him in the Harlem and all that stuff. He when he wanted somebody whacked, he didn't ask permission. So he had this reputation that he didn't listen to the 5 Dons. Crazy guy. He goes into Jilly's bar one night with 2 girlfriends. He was married, but he had Italian. Sonny, if you don't know, when you're an Italian guy and you got a girlfriend, she's your girlfriend. If you're single, but if you're married and you got a girlfriend, she's your gumari. It's my gumad.
Gumari.
Your gumad. Yeah, gumads. Gumads are very, to Italian men in Chicago where I grew up, gumads are very special. They had 3 holidays for an Italian man in Chicago: St. Joseph's birthday, St. Rocco's birthday, and December 23rd. That was Gumadi Christmas Eve.
Gotcha.
That's when you took your gumad.
Right.
And,
Okay.
and if you're a good guy, I'll tell you a funny gumad joke later on. But anyhow, so Crazy Joey's got these two gumadas with him, right? And they're wearing mini skirts and everything. Anyhow, I'm not going to tell any more, but Johnny Carson walked in. After Joey Gallo went in the back room with two of his buddies, he asked Shirley they needed to talk. He left the girls at the bar. Moments later, Johnny walked in with Ed McMahon, and Johnny had a lot of drinks, and he snuck up behind one of the girls and put his hand up her dress. And she let out a scream. And Julie jumped out over the bar and grabbed Ed McMahon and said, "Get him out of here now. Get him out of here fast." And Ed had the wherewithal to get him out of there. She kept screaming till she was hyperventilating. And Crazy Joey Gallo came out and said to her, "What's wrong? What's wrong?" She couldn't get her breath. He slapped her to the ground until she got her breath. She said, "Johnny Carson put his hand up my dress." And I'm not going to tell you the rest. It's in the book. He was a dead man. He was a dead man. And Joey Gallo sent his two thugs out, said, "Go out, find him, beat him to the ground, cut his dick off and stick it in his mouth. You hear me now?" And they took off. And he turned on Jilly. He said, "Jilly, you son of a bitch. You let this Metagon," which is an Italian expression for a non-Italian, "you let him put his hand up my gomacha." And Jilly said, "I was standing by. I didn't see anything." Anyhow, no, long story short, these guys came back and said, "We can't find him." And the rest is in the book. If it wasn't for Frank Sinatra, Johnny Carson would be dead. Frank Sinatra stuck his neck way out. It's in the book of how he did it,
Yeah, definitely. Again, well, I have to finish reading the book. I skimmed over it. It was, and you said it to me yesterday. You said it would put hairs on your neck. And as I'm skimming it, I'm like, and even listening to it now, I've got hairs on the back of my neck. So it just chills. Like that is.
I don't know how that, but hasn't been in a movie like that scene,
right?
Or the overall tale, because that's.
And the only reason I told that story is because Johnny Carson's lawyer Henry Bushkin wrote a book and tried to take credit for quelling that he did that. There was no way in hell. Only Frank Sinatra could have done what he did, and you read in the book how that happened, and it was a scary moment for Frank. Again, I don't want to go through the whole
right,
thing, but it's in the book. And what Frank did was a brave and courageous thing because it was really scary.
That's, man, I just the old school days and how shit got handled is just mind blowing.
It's definitely different these days in Chicago.
Yeah, and Frank got into scuffles? Like scuffles happened all the time, didn't they? Where dudes were just fight each other.
Frank was a barroom scrapper. I as I said, I tended bar. I grew up on the streets, and I had a lot of fights. And I had my nose broke twice, so I can't be too tough, right? But I can spot a guy. When I was a bartender and growing up on the streets, I could look at a guy in the eye and say, "This guy's full of shit. He's full of shit. He couldn't fight his way out of a paper bag. He's selling what we called wolf tickets." And the black community where I grew up with the black kids, wolf tickets were, you ever see the dog barking, woof, woof? He's not going to bite you. He's just woofing. So when you see a guy saying, "Man, I'm going to whip your ass and I'm going to kick your ass and I'll kick your mama's ass," and the black guys might look and say, "He's selling wolf tickets." He ain't going to do it. But there were guys, I could look a guy in the eye and say, "This guy is so full of it." And then I look another guy in the eye and say, "This guy is dangerous. He's going to hurt somebody." And Frank was a barroom scrapper kind of guy and might throw a punch at you when you ain't looking, and Julie would jump in. And, Frank didn't take a lot of lip, but he was a scrapper. But Dean Martin was a tough guy. Dean Martin boxed under the name of Kid Crocetti when he was a kid in Steubenville, Ohio. He had big hands, and he really could fight. He was the toughest of the whole rat pack. He didn't talk about it, but everybody knew you didn't want to mess with Dean. You had your hands full. You did.
Were you ever a part of Dean Martin's roast back in the day?
Yeah, I did two of them. I did Dan Haggerty, who was a Grizzly Adams on a TV show. We roasted him, and then I roasted George Burns, and I was on two of the Dean Martin roasts. But I also I played golf with Dean, and I did some shows with Dean, some corporate dates, and a couple of different things. And I liked him a lot. I really liked him a lot.
Gotcha. Yeah, so I told my parents that we were actually interviewing you, and my dad's a big fan, and he's also a big fan of Dean Martin. And he said, and I quote, "Ask him about Dean Martin and others drinking in TV, as well as the Dean Martin roasts."
Yeah, well, by the way, a lot of people thought Dean was drinking all the time on TV, but he wasn't always. But he drank. Believe me, he drank, but he wasn't always. But I'll tell you, you guys are chilling. But Frank Sinatra did a movie called The Joker's Wild. He played a comedian called Joey Lewis. Joey Lewis was a singer and had his throat slit by the mob, and ended up singing. Ended up being a comedian. Now Joey Lewis was drunk all the time. He drank on stage. Everybody knew it, but he could handle his liquor. But the fact that he was drinking, he could say a lot of things and get away with it because you say, he's drunk. He's talking. Now Dean would act like that. Dean would walk out on stage and say, "Ladies and gentlemen, direct from the bar, welcome Dean Martin." And Dean would walk out and he'd walk up to the microphone. He'd say, like, "Everybody loves somebody sometime." And he'd look over his piano player and he'd say, "How long have I been out here?" Everybody say, "Oh, he's drunk." But Dean emulated Joey Lewis, that drinking, But I'm not saying Dean wasn't a drinker. He could drink,
Right.
Yeah. Well, when I think of Dean Martin, I always think, I feel like, didn't he used to always have like a glass in his hand, or when he would, go out and stuff? So, I mean, he was still, drinking a little bit on TV, right? Or was that stage?
That was stage. That would be iced tea. He wasn't dumb enough to get drunk, but he that character that he played could get away with a lot of things you say because he's drinking, and people got a big kick out of it. Today, Foster Brooks' whole act was about a guy who was drunk. Today, the politically correct police would destroy him. That's not funny. Alcoholism isn't funny or something, they would destroy him. By the way, here's my rant about the politically correct police. And if you've looked it up on YouTube, if you haven't, you can find it. But I say, who are these people that are trying to destroy comedy? The politically correct police. Who are these people? We don't know who they are. We have a First Amendment in this country. Thousands of men and women died so that we have the First Amendment. We can say whatever we want to say. We can't yell fire in a crowded theater, but we can say whatever we want to say because that's what the First Amendment is about. You don't have to listen to us. You can walk out on us. You can ask for your money back, but you can't tell comedians or anybody in America what they can say and what they can't say. I say, and we keep apologizing to you, and we don't even know who the hell you are. We know who we know who the Democrats are, the Republicans are. We know who the independents are. We know who the Moose, the Kiwanis, the Elks. We know who the Ku Klux Klan is, for God's sake. But we don't know who you are, and we keep apologizing to you. So this is my rant to you. Kiss my black ass. I said, is that politically incorrect enough for you?
I think that was beautiful, to be honest. I mean,
because I got to tell you, guys, they cannot stop. We have the Constitution of the United States. Lenny Bruce, a lot of these comedians went to jail for this, but we can say whatever we want to say. So we'll take you to court, and we'll win in court on the First Amendment. But it isn't the government that's going to destroy your career anymore. It's high tech, big tech. So if they don't like what you say, if you say something that's politically against what they think, they'll destroy your career. They'll put it on social media, and pretty soon you'll be going to do a show. There'll be people picketing out in front. Big, not the government, but big tech could destroy your career if you don't fall on the shade. Start apologizing for everything. I was on a show one day, and I was telling a story about Dean Martin and Frank Sinatra. It was a radio show, and I said, and Frank said to Dean, "Hey, Deg," and the guy said, "What?" I said, "Well, Frank called him Deg, and he called Frank Deg. It was short for Dago. They called each other, hey, Deg. Hey, Deg." That's what they called each other. The guy said, "Wow, they couldn't get away with that today." I said, "I would love to be in a room, I hope be on the 17th floor, where Dean Martin and Frank Sinatra call each other Deg, and you tell them you can't call each other that. Open a window, you're going out the window."
Well, yeah, they seem like the kind of guys that wouldn't have listened to that anyway. Like someone would have been like, "You can't say that," and they would have been like,
"Who are you to say that?" Yeah,
like, are you talking to me about like I mean, it's especially like what we talked about earlier with the fact that like you can make fun of your own, like if you're Jewish, you can only do Jewish jokes. If you're that sort of thing. I mean, even along those lines. I mean, they were both Italian guys. They were both like the front men of Italian people, if you're not looking at the mob, but, you're looking at like the big stars of the time that represented the Italian community. So,
yeah, well, I mean, but again, There would be Italians that would probably say, you can't say that. All of a sudden, everybody in this country is super sensitive to the point where it's gone too far now. You know what? Again, a comedian can say whatever they want. Anybody, when you say to a comedian, watch me close, guys, if I can do this. If you say to a comedian, I want you to go out there, and by the way, don't say this, and then don't say that, and then don't say this, and don't say that. You just put that comedian in a box. And then everything that they are as a comedian. One of the great comedians of our time is a guy named Pat Cooper. If you ever knew about Pat Cooper, he said whatever he wanted to say, whenever he wanted to say it, to whoever he wanted to say. And a lot of people were offended by everything he said, but he didn't give a shit because he was a comedian who said what he wanted to say. You know, and that's what comedy's all about. Again, you don't have to buy their ticket. You don't have to go to their show. You don't have to. You can turn them off. You can complain, but you can't stop them because of our First Amendment. That's what America is about. When you silence the comedian, we're the last bastion of freedom of speech. Once you start telling people what they can say, my brothers, listen to what I'm saying. Once you start telling people what they can say, the next step, you're going to start telling them what they have to think. That's the next step, and that's communism. That's what socialism leads to, is communism. They'll start telling you what you have to think when they start telling you what you have to say.
So if you had a brand new comic walk through that door right behind you, I know you'd probably be like, what the hell is going on? But if he's just starting your career, what would you tell him?
Well, I mean, there's so many things. Number one, start where you are. If you're in Toledo, Ohio, start there. Number two, work as often as you can. Get up on every stage, every chance you get, everywhere. Volunteer to do charity work. Say, I'll MC your charity and do a couple jokes in there. Whatever. Work as often as you can. Number three, I'd say maybe read the book, The Magic of Believing by Claude Bristol. If you don't believe in yourself, how can you expect others to believe in you? Read every positive mental attitude book you can get about the stage. Number four, realize no one is ever going to help you. You always think, I'm going to get there. One day someone's going to see me and discover me. They won't till you're ready. They won't till you're ready. You've got to be, if you're not marketable, they can't make any money off of you. So when you get, work it often again, realize, don't start thinking someone's going to come along and discover you. You've got to do it, And number five, don't ever quit. If you really believe this. Bertrand Russell once said, there are people in show business who become major stars simply because they didn't have sense enough to quit when they should have. That's my story. That's everybody's story. I slept in a car. My wife left me 3 times. She hated show business. I couldn't see my kids. I got them all back. I mean, I won in the end, but I wouldn't give up. Don't ever quit if this is your dream. If you really want to be a stand-up comedian. Now, there's a difference. Watch your ego. There's a difference between, doing it because you want to show every one of those son of a bitches back home who said you'd never make it, and you want to own that, have several Rolls Royces, and you'll show them, and you're going to have a multi-million-dollar. That's your ego. Right. Your spirit says, I love making people laugh. I love to hear the sound of laughter. I'm going to digress. The first time I ever went on stage with Tim Reid, I'd never been on stage before in my life. I wrote something that was funny. When I went on stage that night, I got a laugh. My very first time on stage. It was like one of those B movies where the dark clouds open up and the sun bursts through, and my whole being went, yeah. Oh, yeah. I found it. This is what I want to do. I've been wandering aimlessly, but now I knew I wanted to be a comedian. The thought that you might make a living as a comedian overwhelmed me, that you could make a living making people laugh. I couldn't sleep all that night. It was a Friday night. I got up the next morning, a Saturday morning, and I went to the church that I had been an altar boy in. And I sang in the choir when I was a little boy, when my mom sang in the choir when she was a little girl. But it was a Saturday. There was no service there. I was the only one in the church. And I got on my hands and knees and I prayed. I said, God, now I know what I want. I want to be a stand-up comedian. Please, God, let me make my living as a stand-up comedian. I'll do charities. I started making all these promises, what I do. But I knew from that moment I wanted to be a stand-up comedian. That was 50 years ago in September 1969. In September 2019, 50 years later, I went back to that church, and on a Sunday, I gave a sermon on the power of prayer. Wow. And I talked on the power of prayer, and I told that congregation, I knelt right there. That's where I knelt. I said, how many of you out there ever said you're thinking of somebody and you hadn't seen him in a long time, and the phone rings and it's that person. And you said, I was just thinking about you. And they said, I was thinking about you too. Or you're walking down the street and you said, I can't believe it. I'm just talking about you. And I said, how many has that happened? They all raised their hands. I said, if human beings can transfer thought, and obviously we can, then how much can a supreme being transfer thought? Can you transfer thought to a supreme being? I believe in God. I believe in a higher power. And I've really agonized over it times in my life. But in the end, I just, I used to talk to Alan Shepard, the first man in space. And I said to him one time, Alan, he was drinking a lot of martinis, we're drinking, it's long since retired. I said, Admiral, you were out on the moon and you looked out into outer space. There are 400 billion galaxies out there. Is there a God? He said, after a moment, he thought about it. And he said, there's something really powerful out there. And that's what I think. So I say the supreme being. So I'm saying all that to say, that if you're a comedian, you want to be a comedian, you have the passion that I had, you have that same passion, then that's what you want to be. Then don't let anybody get in the way of that. And by the way, you may not ever fill an arena of 20,000 people. You may most sell 50 people in your life, 50 tickets or 100. But if you're making a living as a stand-up comedian, that's what you want to do. Then don't let anything get in the way of that. Don't ever quit.
Amen to that.
Yeah, that's awesome. I did want to ask about meeting Tim Reid also. When you met Tim Reid, you had just you hadn't even been on stage yet. You guys were going around doing the presentations to the schools.
We were in the JCs.
The JCs.
The JCs in those days were young men of action, 18 to 36 years of age. They worked, anytime there was a problem in the community, they worked on that problem. They would form a committee and they'd teach you how to serve on a committee, how to chair a committee, how to serve on subcommittees, how to conduct a meeting. They had a lot of great training programs, leadership training programs. And they attacked the problems of the community. One of the biggest problems in those days was our youth using drugs, as it is today. And I wrote a drug education program teaching grade school children the ills of drug abuse with humor, a concept I had on getting the kids laughing and then planting the seeds of the ills of drug abuse, helping me. And I'm going to go back to, I was praying at that time, God, what is it I'm supposed to be doing? I'd be in a bar with my buddies at 2:00 in the morning saying, I don't belong here, but I didn't know where I belong. And I would pray. I said, God, what is it? Show me what is I'm supposed to be doing. I'd go from job to job and never felt fulfilled. But when I proposed this drug education program, I had a friend going to help me, a white guy named John DeBoer. And the night I presented this program to the JCs, so they'd sanction it, this young black kid came up to me. It was his first time at a meeting. He had came from Norfolk State College. E.I. DuPont recruited him in Chicago as a marketing rep. And he joined the JCs. And he said, I would like to work with you on that project. I said, gee, thanks, but I got a guy already. And he said, okay. The next day, as fate would have it, John DeBoer told me, I can't do that project. I got a new job. I said, gee, what was that black guy's name? Oh, yeah, Tim Reid. I got a hold of Tim. We start working on the project. We went into the classroom. The moment I walked in the classroom with him, I realized what a blessing this was because the children were black and white. So we were young guys. We walked into the classroom. They see a young black guy and a young white guy. And we were telling jokes off of one another, fooling around, making people laugh, playing records, getting the kids' attention. And then once we got them relaxed, we start presenting our program on the ills of drug abuse. After about 8 months, the program became very successful. A little 8th grade girl came as we were walking. She was walking out of the classroom. She said to Tim and I, you guys are funny. You ought to become a comedy team. And the thought of a black-white comedy team intrigued us. No one had ever done that before in the history of show business, the history of America. So we decided that's what we're going to do. And we started writing what we thought was material. And there were no comedy clubs. One night we went into a club and we got up and as they say, the rest is history. But we paid dues like no other act ever had to pay. 1969, Civil Rights Act. The Civil Rights Act had been passed only 5 years prior to that. You didn't see a black guy and a white guy walking down the street together, let alone get on the stage together. There were race riots all over America in every major city, Philadelphia, Chicago. In my neighborhood in Harvey, where I grew up at, one of the biggest riots in the country. Students were protesting the Vietnam War. Vietnam War was raging. I had just gotten out of the service. Tim just got out of college. And we were going across the land trying to make people laugh. Wherever there was racial tension, we weren't preaching, but we did 11 prisons in 1 year. We did colleges, high schools, wherever there was racial tension. The county jail in Chicago 3 times. Wherever there was tension, we went and tried to make people laugh. And I'll close with this. The team stayed together 6 years. We did an album. He's my best friend to this day. I love him to death. And his children call me Uncle Tom. When I leave here tonight, I'm going to dinner with his daughter, Tori, and his first wife, Rita. They're here. They call me Uncle Tom. The kids call me Uncle Tom, which it turned into some funny stories. Uncle Tom. One time at Norfolk State College, Tim and I were giving a lecture and we were selling books. And Tori hadn't seen me for about a year, his daughter. And I was at a buffet table before we spoke with 7 black college professors. We were getting our food. And Tori came in and she was clear across the room and she saw me. She started hollering, Uncle Tom, Uncle Tom. And these black professors turned around, looked at her, and I said, she's talking to me. I'm Uncle Tom. But again, we pay dues. I'll close with this. I can't tell you how many times after Tim and I were doing a show where there was racial tension, where a young white guy would come up to us and say, I got a black friend that I like to reach out to. But if I do, the white guys are going to give me a bad time. But after watching you and Tim, I'm going to reach out to my black friend. Then a black guy would come up and say, I got a white friend. I like the guy, but the brother's going to wear me out. But after watching you and Tim, I'm going to reach out to my white friend. That means more to Tim and I than any awards you could give us or anything. That happened to us all the time.
That's amazing.
That's awesome. And as I was reading through that chapter in the book, I was almost having chills. Like even the different racial tension you talked about in the book, where after the first night you guys got off the stage, things like that. The normal things that you read about in a history book, basically, that maybe we don't, like growing up in this era, experience the blatant racism as much as the subtle racism. But it was just insane to me and then when I mentioned to you on the phone and you said, well, actually, I don't say it as biracial. I say it as the first black and white, but then the only black and white. That was surprising to me that no one else had thought to do that so far. But do you have any, why do you think no one has explored that option now?
Well, what's so funny about that is that first of all, there aren't a lot of comedy teams today. When I started, there were a lot of comedy teams because there isn't you can't make a lot of money as a comedy team. You got to split the money when you're starting out. But in the days we had the Playboy circuit and all that kind of stuff. But it's so funny. They're always talking about, imagine this was 51 years ago. Tim Reid and I were America's first black and white time. And guess what people were talking about? Race relations. We need more discourse among the races and race relations. We need race relations. Well, Tim Reid and I were having the discourse America wasn't having. You know what we were having on stage? Race relations. We were, you guys, having relations. We were making people laugh. We were poking fun at both out of our stereotypes. And so we were having a discourse America wasn't having. And to this 51 years later, they're saying, we need better race relations. Tim Reid and I we were a threat. I got to tell you, I don't think racism exists today as much as the media wants you to believe. I believe that most black folks I've met in my whole life, they don't hate white people. And most white people do not hate black people. Are there some who do? Yeah. When Tim and I worked the black clubs at Chitlin Circuit, if we worked an all black club and there was a black guy who hated white people, hated them with a passion, he wasn't mad at me. He was mad at Tim for being with me. If we worked a white redneck club where there was a white guy who hated black people, he wasn't mad at Tim. He was mad at me for being with Tim. And 3 of them got me down in a men's room down in Atlanta, Georgia, when I tried to do a number on me. But I, again, I'm a street guy, and that's another story. But it's so interesting how to this day they're still talking that. And I got to tell you, the media, there are people who really profit by us being divided. Profit by it. And I've watched them for years. They're race baiters. it doesn't exist as much as they want you to know it exists. Be careful of divide and conquer. If you read my book, when we first started out, Tim Reid and I, a very good friend of mine, a black guy who was a lead singer in the Dells, he told us, Tim and I went to his house. We had not been on stage at all. We wanted his advice. We said, Marvin, a very good buddy of mine. I grew up across the street from him. He was a lead singer. He said, Tom, it's a great idea, you and Tim. No one's ever done that before. But as we were leaving, he said, be careful. They're going to try to break you guys up. And Tim and I stopped. We turned to what? I said, who? He said, they. I said, who they? He said, whoever. They're going to come to you, Tom, and say, you don't need that black guy. You're funnier without that black guy. Tim, they're going to go, you don't need that brother. You don't need that white boy, that honky. You don't need him. You're funnier than him. He said, be careful. That's going to happen. And sure enough, it did. That kind of stuff happened. And there are people in this nation who enjoy us fighting, because as long as they keep us fighting together, they can destroy America. You can't destroy America militarily. We're the strongest military ever that existed on this planet. I spent 4 years in the military. I'm a proud patriot. I fly my American flag and I stand for the national anthem. And I believe in this country. I believe in the Constitution of the United States. But be careful. There are people who want to break us up. They can't break us up militarily from outside, but inside they can destroy you. And that's exactly what they're trying to do. Get us fighting amongst one another. And be careful of that.
And it kind of circles back to what we were talking about at the beginning of what people take in and like the toxicity of what social media can bring you and all of that and just how you perceive it. Like when the world was going crazy not too long ago, I took a break off social media. And the things I just realized about, how exhausting it was and just mentally draining and like soaking that all in is just insane. But those people that tried splitting you guys up, that's kind of what cancel culture is. So cancel culture was, it existed back then too.
Yeah, they just call racism something different these days.
Yeah. Again, I can't tell you. The other thing is, let's make everybody feel like victims, because if you're a victim, you'll never become a victor. So if you're a victim, a victim is a wonderful. I tell the class, I had 8 brothers and sisters. My mom and dad were alcoholic. I had holes in my shoes. Oh, poor me. Psychiatrists would say, that childhood that boy had, if he went to prison, it wasn't his fault. Bullshit. It's my fault. It's my fault. I'm not a victim. I'm a victor. I gave you've probably heard me do this, but I gave a motivation speech to a group of young guys. And I told them, how long do you think you should live with your parents? And one boy said, till we're 40 or 50 if we want to. And I said, oh, really? I said, why? He said, because, we didn't ask to be here. I said, we didn't ask to be here? I said, I don't want to give you a biology lesson. But when your mother and father made love, from your father came 5 million seeds. Did you know that? 2.5 million died instantly. The other millions died along the way. And soon there was only 100,000 seeds left. And then there was 500 seeds left. And then there was only 100 seeds left. And guess what? There was only 5 seeds left. 4, 3, 2, 1. You. Don't ever tell me you didn't ask to be here. Bullshit. You fought to be here. When I was in the service, I started reading all these books, The Power of Positive Thinking by Norman Vincent Peale, A Guide to Confident Living. I started reading all these books on how to improve my mind. I was 17 years old when I was in the military. And like most 17-year-old boys, I was reading these 10-cent novels where somebody got laid on every page. And an old black guy in my ship said, Tom, if you're going to read so much, read something that'll improve your mind. So I started reading all these positive mental attitude books and the Psycho-Cybernetics and The Power of Your Subconscious Mind by Joseph Murphy and all these books. Dale Carnegie, Positive Mental Attitude. And it started to help me change my life around. I changed my thinking. And once I got there, I wanted other people to feel the same relief that I was feeling, that negative thoughts don't control you unless you allow them to control you. I would take a glass of water in my classroom and I'd pour dirt in it and I'd stir up the dirt and I'd hand it to somebody and say, drink it. And they wouldn't drink it. I said, you won't drink dirt. Why would you think dirt? If you won't ingest filth in this part of your body, why would you put filth in this part of your body? Negative thoughts are dirt. You are in control of this vehicle you have. This is the vehicle I was given. It's like the pilot who flies a 747 every day from LA to Boston. Do you think he drives to the runway, drives to the airport 100 miles an hour? goes out on the tarmac, slams on his brakes, runs aboard the aircraft, takes off down the runway and say, now where am I going? He files a flight plan. This is your vehicle. File a flight plan. I teach them how to do that. I love motivating people. I think it was Mark Twain that said, stay away from small people. Stay away from people who belittle your ambitions. Small people always do that. Successful people want you to become a success as well. And that's the way I feel. I want everybody I meet to become a success. Let me help you. Let me talk to you. Let me encourage you. That makes me feel good.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. And I don't want to hold you for too long. I know you're going to dinner. But I have one last final question, which is, when you're in Chicago, or when you would come to Chicago, was there anywhere that you were like, this is my go-to? I got to go here. I got to get dinner here. I got to go to and grab a drink somewhere specific because you knew the owner, the bartender, like somewhere that felt kind of like home.
Oh, by the way, there were so many of those places. When I was a drinker, I quit drinking a long time ago. I didn't go on the program. I just one day said, I'm sick and tired of waking up sick and tired. But I used to hang around the Hotsy Totsy bar on Division Street. It's not there anymore. PJ Clark's. With Frank, we hung out in the pump room at the Ambassador East. They have the pump room. And if you go in there now, even now, they got the back booth where we used to sit. They got a picture of Frank there. But when I go to Chicago, I go to Gibson's Steakhouse. Of course, I also invested in Tavern on the Rush across the street from Gibson. So I go hang out in front there. But Steve Lombardo, the owner of Gibson's, is a good friend of mine. Carmine's, Alex Dana is a good friend of mine. He owns Rosebud and Little Italy. I took Frank to dinner there many times, when you go and if you go into Carmine's, there's a picture of me and Frank on the wall, and the same way at Gibson. I love Chicago, and I miss Chicago every day. I don't miss 40 below zero, but I miss Chicago. That's where I hang out.
I hear that.
Guys, you're right. I do have to go to dinner. We've been here 2 hours, and it went by like 5 hours. It went by. No, I'm sorry. But it was great being with you guys.
And it was definitely great getting the chance to talk to you for this long, and we're grateful for that. But yeah, I'll let you know when we release this. And thank you so much for your time.
Well, I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to. Look at that. I'm going to see that. I'm going to look on Amazon when you get my book, and I'm going to see, after doing this show airs, how big a show you got, because the sales have got to go through the roof after talking to you guys.
Well, and I'm going to put the link for everyone that listens to this. They can buy it. The link is in the description. And make sure to check out and follow Tom at tomdreesen.com and on social. So thank you again, Tom. And
thank you, Tom.
And have fun at dinner.
Okay,
thank you, Tom. Have a good dinner.
Great to be with you guys. Take care.